Good afternoon, dear friends. Ruslan Belov here. Yesterday, Zelensky gave a speech and said a lot of interesting things. He claimed that the Russian army is planning a large-scale offensive in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. He also said that the US is now using Russian narratives, that Special Envoy Witkow is saying some very strange things and living in his own world, essentially repeating Putin's words. Well, in short, he said a lot. It will now be interesting to see the American side's reaction. Meanwhile, let's continue analyzing the situation on the front. Opening the map. So friends, yesterday Putin also held a meeting with Marines, and in essence, he announced an imminent large-scale offensive by the Russian army into Sumy Oblast. I mean a full-fledged, massive offensive. Of course, the offensive is already underway. For example, even American cartographers, after several days of deliberation, have shaded this territory, including part of Basovka, as being under stable and indisputable Russian control. Although, de facto, this entire area, like all of Basovka, except for the very southern outskirts, is also under firm Russian control. Well, they'll think for a couple more days and then shade it in too. And by the way, just this section alone, let's measure it. It turns out to be over 25 square kilometers. Plus, there are the areas of Zherebets, Vasilevka and Vladimirovka. At the moment, Russian control in Sumy Oblast exceeds the area of Ukrainian armed forces control in Kursk Oblast. We'll talk about Kursk separately later. So it's important to understand that right now there is no full-scale offensive by the Russian army in Sumy Oblast. Not even heavy equipment is being used here, just infantry on quad bikes. But this infantry on quad bikes, just so you know, has already taken control of several villages and nearly 50 square kilometers. Now Putin, while speaking with Marines yesterday, specifically those currently in the Demidovka area of Belgorod Oblast, said, and I quote, "So here's a question for you. Are your battalions operating south of Demidovka?" They replied, "Yes, exactly." And then he continued, "Pay attention. I'll tell you two words now. The brigade's overall objectives will change slightly." And what does it mean that the brigade's objectives will change? It means the mission will no longer be to hold back Ukrainian forces at the border, but to advance deeper into Sumy Oblast. By the way, regarding Belgorod Oblast, there were successes here yesterday. You see, this area is now shaded yellow, whereas yesterday it was all blue. That is, it was under UAF control, but now that control is gone. If yesterday the UAF was still clinging to the southern outskirts of Popovka, now they've been completely pushed out, even from all the southern tree lines. Thus, this entire area is now either a grey zone or under border guard control. As for Demidovka, no changes yet. Russian troops remain in the northeastern part, and heavy fighting continues. Now let's talk about Kursk and the horrifying footage that has started to emerge. Yesterday, several pieces of confirmed footage appeared showing the capture of the Sudza checkpoint and the advance to the state border. In the coming days, I'm sure we'll also receive confirmation of the liberation of Oleshnya, and the entire northern sector of the UAF's Kursk bridgehead will cease to exist. It will disappear. All that will remain is to deal with the 30 square kilometers of the southern sector that the UAF still controls. But what was truly shocking were the videos that surfaced just days ago from the already liberated areas of Kursk Oblast. They found mass graves, including those of murdered children. That is the price someone had to pay for the failure to respond to threats in time. The authorities should have evacuated civilians at the first signs of danger, as is now being done in Belgorod Oblast. Instead, for several days, they kept chanting that the UAF had been pushed out, that it was no big deal, that people should stop spreading panic, and so on. And now we're finding those killed in Ruskoye Porechnoye, and now these kinds of footage. Now let's move on to other sectors of the front. Yesterday, on one particular section, the UAF's defenses collapsed, and this isn't just a bold statement, it's reality. We're talking about the bridgehead on the right bank of the Zherebets River. Here, Russian forces made a significant advance by the standards of this conflict. From this sector all the way to Katerinivka. Let's even measure the distance, over 6.5 kilometers. Now that's a very powerful push, honestly. When a soldier on the ground wrote that they were moving at full speed while the UAF was running without looking back, not even trying to stabilize the front, I thought it was an exaggeration. But turns out he wasn't lying. That's exactly how it happened. In this conflict, even a 2-kilometer advance is considered a good result, but here we're talking about 6.5 kilometers at once. In addition to this breakthrough, assault units also entered Katarinivka yesterday, securing a foothold on the southern outskirts. Fighting is ongoing there now. Plus, they've reached the outskirts of another village, Novoye, which, as you can see on the map, is much larger than Katarinivka. The broader objective here is to take all these villages: Katarinivka, Novoye, Zelena Dolina, and Red Kudub. Capturing them will allow for the creation of a strong bridgehead for further advances south toward the city of Lyman. Overall, in just 2 days, March 26th to 27th, the army nearly doubled the bridgehead. Before, the front line ran like this, with about 28 square kilometers under control. Now it looks like this, meaning 25 additional square kilometers were secured in 2 days. The total area of the Zherebets River bridgehead now exceeds 50 square kilometers. A well-executed operation, I'd say. Now moving on to this sector of the front. First, as I mentioned in a recent update, the goal here was to straighten the front line between Andriivka and Serebryansk. As you can see, that task has been completed. Yes, for now, American cartographers mark these fields as a grey zone, but let's be real. Andriivka is under full control, as are Serebryansk and Zaporizhzhia, meaning there's no grey zone here, just full Russian control. Sooner or later, the Americans will start shading these areas red too. Additionally, assaults on Rosliv have been ongoing for several days, with parallel advances bypassing the village from both the north and south. Essentially, the village is now operationally encircled. The only retreat option for the UAF is toward Bodanivka, but all the fields there are under fire and fully exposed. Once again, the UAF finds itself in a familiar predicament. They could have withdrawn earlier without losses, but they waited too long. Now, a painless retreat is no longer an option. Finally, progress has also been made in Vesele. A few days ago, troops entered the southern part. We discussed this, and yesterday, strikes targeted the center and northern outskirts. Given that this was the last line of defense in front of the village, we can officially declare it breached. Once Vesele is fully cleared, expect a push into the rear of the entire defensive line stretching from Shevchenko to Vesele. Overall, as you can see, the frontline dynamics indicate that the Russian army holds the initiative on nearly all sectors. In some places, the advance is strong, in others, weaker, but March has clearly been better than February. There are still 4 days left in the month, after which we'll tally the results. But excluding Kursk Oblast, the total advance will likely be around 300 square kilometers, and with Kursk, over 600. Meanwhile, Zelensky keeps claiming that Russian forces are standing still. Maybe in his reports and his reality, they really are, or maybe the UAF is even advancing. But we see the maps, and the reality is completely different. That said, the fighting remains tough. All right, that's all for today. Wishing you all a productive day.